Okay, start a second. Hi, Mike.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing okay.
I know
Just
there
some house,
are
just
crazier
some.
things. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted for those that were looking for our Disney World chat. My internet went down. We're going to be doing that shortly after this one ends, but we already had planned to talk Star Wars with Mike, so we're going to do that um, as well. So, how's how? Just going to ask you a personal question. How's quarantine affected your Star Wars habits? You get more into it because you have time, or how's that working out for you?
Um, am I more into Star Wars now than I was a few months ago? I don't know if that would be possible. I mean, I read the Queen's Peril novel, and I'm reading Alphabet Squadron 2 right now. So, but I would have done that anyway. Other than that, no, probably just as consumed as ever with Star Wars.
Well, it's great. For those that don't know, Mike is our editorial director for Star Wars content at Laughing Place, and it's great to have someone who we all love Star Wars, but it's good to have someone who really knows their stuff like Mike does. And so we're going to just take this time. If you've watched the Marvel show earlier in the week, kind of similar. We're just going to talk Star Wars, see and see what Mike has to say about the news of the day. So what's the top story for the week, Mike?
I think the top story is what I chose as my virtual background today, which is the Star Wars Tales from the Galaxy's Edge virtual reality experience coming from ILM X Lab to Oculus platforms. Very excited to check that out. I have been wanting more stories set on Batuu. You know, the novels have been going there occasionally. Obviously, there was the comic book series, but yeah, now that they have that planet to play around in, I was hoping for more stories set there that you can, kind of when we get to go back to the parks, you can kind of visit the parks and go like, hey, that's where this happened and so on.
Yeah, I know we talked recently about like how living can Batuu be, as Star Wars telling progresses and regresses,
Yeah.
but the attractions there are pretty locked in between um, um, episode 8 and 9.
Right.
And so, you know, I was kind of curious at how much they'll flesh out Batuu moving forward. And from the theme park business, typically, despite all best laid plans, with few exceptions, once they're built, they're kind of locked and loaded and they move on to the next thing. So
That was one thing I was actually a little disappointed by in this announcement, is that this story is also set between episodes 8 and 9. I was kind of hoping like, oh, I'll get to see Batuu as it appeared during an earlier era, or and you know beyond the end of episode 9 or whatever. But yeah, it's going to be set during the same time period as the land itself. So, but it'll be interesting to see it from in a different format, I guess.
and I mean, my patience is fairly long right now, especially since I know Imagineering is working on a skeleton crew, and investment in new experiences is going to wait until they can get the parks back up and running. So I don't want to be insensitive, but yeah, I mean, I think once we enter a more normal world, it'll be, at least this is a good sign that they haven't forgotten about Galaxy's Edge. It's not open and done, and Scott moves on to a different project, and uh, we're done with it. So
Yeah, and it's strange timing also, because obviously we can't. I mean, the parks are going to be reopening soon, but if I didn't know better, if I didn't know how long a project like this takes to develop, I would have thought, oh, okay, this is like a way for them to kind of fill in for us not being able to go to the park. But yeah, obviously something like this would have been in development for a long time.
one other weird thing that was announced was Jedi Temple Challenge, which is a kids game show, like I don't want to say Double Dare, but that kind of thing. Um, that was announced for Disney Plus.
Yeah, my wife calls it Star Wars Legends of the Hidden Temple,
Yeah,
which is basically what it is.
that's basically what it is. Did this catch you by surprise?
I was surprised. I said to you when we saw that announcement that It's not going to Disney Plus anymore. Obviously, it's going to YouTube starting next Wednesday. They're releasing the first 2 episodes. And yeah, it was just surprising. And the quote accompanying the little press release said that they wanted to get the show out there and available to as many kids as possible. But to me, it's like, I guess it's kind of a trade-off between accessibility and featuring that content. You know, I feel like putting it on Disney Plus gives it a little bit more of a more cred, I guess, rather than kind of dumping it on YouTube, where there is original Star Wars content going up. You know, you have Galaxy of Adventures and the Forces of Destiny, animated shorts and stuff. But I'm assuming this is more of a long form show. This is probably what, half an hour or 20, probably 20 minutes or so,
Yeah.
if I had to guess, per episode, which will be unusual, but I'll definitely be checking it out. I'm curious to check it out. And the sets look really cool. The costume designs for Ahmed Best's character and the droids and stuff look nice. High production value, at least.
Yeah, what was interesting to me was I always envisioned that this was sort of like a stopgap for Star Wars content between, until we can get to Mandalorian and the Star Wars television engine was really going. And not to downplay, all the people involved in the production, but knowing Disney Plus, can't get new content right now because, you can do pre-production, you can do post-production, but you can't do production.
Right.
I was surprised that they would not just take everything they could get their hands on. Now Mandalorian season 2 is on track because they did everything, but who knows after that or in between that. So I was just really surprised that they would dump anything, and I don't mean not in a pejorative sense, but just put it on YouTube when there's Disney channels suffering, ABC suffering. Not that it was going to go to ABC, but all the Disney owned distribution networks are looking for content. It's just weird to me that they would put something on YouTube that was originally designed for Disney Plus, which is, has subscribers that are looking for anything at this point.
Right. And one of my first thoughts when I heard that was that I felt bad for Ahmed Best, who has a history of kind of being mistreated in the Star Wars fandom. And I thought, oh, when he heard that news, he must have been really disappointed. But there was an interview with him on the Star Wars show this week, and he seemed enthusiastic about, I mean, obviously he's on camera and pushing the show and everything, but he seemed genuinely fine with the show coming to YouTube.
Well, and I mean, it is good. There's no barrier to watch it, right? Everyone can watch it.
Yeah.
You don't need to have a Disney Plus account or Disney Channel, what have you.
Right. And obviously there's no way to know, there's no like controlled experiment to see which format or which venue would have got more viewers for the show. But
yeah, well, and Disney Plus, I think, is still filling itself out. They've been playing with the release strategy. They've been putting things, and I don't think the pandemic is helping with their experimenting, but there was talk of, maybe changing their release strategy. And there's been, we've heard rumors of projects that have come and gone. So, I'm sure there's a great story behind the scenes about what happened.
Yeah.
Not that anything bad happened, but I'm sure that discussion was fascinating. But everyone, you'll still be able to access it, and everyone will be able to access it. So.
And one other thing I wanted to point out is that Ahmed Best did say that he got to help in coming up with his character's name and I guess costume design and stuff, but he specifically chose the name of his character to be related to the character he plays very briefly in Star Wars Episode 2 Attack of the Clones, when he's like got a cameo appearance in the bar on Coruscant. So those characters are somehow related in some way.
On Disney Plus, though, has been Disney Gallery Mandalorian, sort of behind the scenes of the Mandalorian that it's been going on since May 4th. This week's episode was on practical effects.
Yep.
I know you do a sort of what I learned post every week. What do you think of this week's episode?
I really liked it. I think last week's was gonna be the highlight of the entire series, because I remember watching that episode and just like tearing up because of how revolutionary the Star Wars universe this process was. They came up with this thing called the volume, where they've got these giant LED screens surrounding the entire soundstage where they're shooting, and you can point the camera where you want to look, and the background will adjust itself for your point of view. That kind of thing is gonna, I think, be the future of filmmaking. I think if we fast forward, 25 years, basically every big budget Hollywood blockbuster is going to be doing this. But yeah, this week's episode was probably the thing that would have appealed to me the most before, because I am really into like practical effects and puppets and stuff. So this was mostly about, they talked a lot about the Baby Yoda puppet, which they just called Baby apparently on set. It wasn't child like we know it officially now. They talked about the Salacious Crumb, Kowakian Monkey Lizard puppet, and the costuming, the props, basically everything that was actually built and physically there, as opposed to the opposite side, which we kind of learned about last week. And I really like that aspect of Star Wars and how things are tactile and real. So that was really interesting and cool to see as well.
Seeing Mr. Herzog direct the Baby,
right,
is
I'm still getting over the fact that Werner Herzog was involved with Star Wars in any way. But that's one of the things I love about The Mandalorian, is that they pulled in all these people that I would not associate it with Star Wars or nerd culture in any way, like Bill Burr and Werner Herzog and Amy Sedaris and people like that.
It's very inspiring to see someone who's accomplished as a filmmaker. I don't mean that in a popcorn film kind of way. I just mean like the art of film. Talk about a Star Wars project,
yeah,
and the stuff that goes with that, practical effects, visual effects, and seem genuinely impressed at the technology, the techniques, and the storytelling. And I mean, you're right about last week's episode of Disney Gallery. It's like it reinforces my Jon Favreau as a modern Walt Disney. I don't know that anyone has, and I mean, no disrespect to James Cameron or George Lucas, I don't think anyone has mastered the balance between technology mastery and storytelling mastery, as well as Jon Favreau since Walt Disney. Not that he hasn't had missteps, not that he isn't, but he understands all of these things, and it's not just done because he can do it. It's done to serve a purpose, and then his understanding of storytelling is so strong that I think it works perfectly.
Yeah, I actually said that a couple times to my wife as we were watching this series. Like, I said, Jon Favreau is a genius, and I'm so glad that he's contributing in some way to Star Wars. And I actually think the partnership between Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni is going to continue to be so fruitful, because Filoni has that deep understanding of Star Wars lore, and I don't know that Filoni has that filmmaking his background, and obviously he was an animator, but Favreau's bringing that live action filmmaking skill and talent and approach, and partnering that with Filoni's take on Star Wars lore. I think that's the perfect pairing, and I can only see that improving as it goes along as well.
And I mean, between Iron Man, Star Wars, and Jungle Book, and I mean, The Lion King got criticized for copying too much The Lion King, but I think artistically it's still beautiful. That he's the kind of guy that I like. Disney is typically franchise driven, and not so much filmmaker driven, in that while they want to get good filmmakers, they don't do a lot of first look production deals and stuff like that, because they will bring in good filmmakers to their franchises. He's the kind of guy where if he wants to make something, I think Disney should just greenlight it. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be a Hulu miniseries. It could be whatever. Yeah. I think he's just one of the most talented storytellers out there.
Yeah, and like I said on my podcast this week, like whatever money they paid to make The Jungle Book and Lion King and The Mandalorian, even if none of those projects had ended up being successful, I think it would have been beyond worth it just for having that technology developed to make this films, because again, like I think that's going to echo through the entire kind of reverberate through the entire film industry going forward like decades. So
And
definitely a good investment.
it's not Star Wars related, but you should read Alex's article about the return of Fantasound he did when the Jungle Book came out. I mean, if that doesn't make you love Jon Favreau, I don't know what will. Uh,
Okay. I'm
so
already a fan, so
moving on to sort of the physical world. Uh, there's some Hasbro Black Series news. What's going
yeah,
on there?
I'm a big Star Wars action figure collector going back to my youth, I guess. But yeah, I love the Hasbro Black Series 6-inch series. That's the one that I collect now. I buy I try to acquire all the action figures between. I don't collect the prequel stuff and I don't collect the sequel stuff, but everything in between. So like Mandalorian, original trilogy, Rogue One, Solo, Star Wars story, all that stuff I've been buying. But today they, not today, yesterday actually, they announced a new packaging for the Black Series, and it looks really, really great. It's color coded for the project. So like if it's Star Wars Rebels, for example, because they're re-releasing a bunch of Star Wars Rebels characters in this series, and they're adding in one new one, Zeb Aurelios, um, and that like completes the main
Hmm.
cast of Star Wars Rebels. So everybody's really excited about that. So that's one color. I forget what it's like, a purple or something.
Yeah.
And then like if it's Mandalorian, I think is orange, and you've got the Mandalorian coming out in the Beskar armor. There's a stormtrooper from the Mandalorian. Those two are in the orange packaging. Then you've got Tebow, the Ewok from Return of the Jedi. I'm really excited to get that one. The first Ewok in this series is Tebow for some reason. You think they would start with Wicket or Chief Chirpa or something like that, but yeah, Tebow. Okay. Um, and yeah, Admiral Akbar coming out for the first time in his Return of the Jedi uniform. Previously, he's only been available in the Force Awakens
Hmm.
uniform that he's wearing in that movie. So
I had
yeah,
no idea.
some cool figures.
Yeah, it's nice that the toy line can continue kind of keeping us going in this drought of
Yeah,
content. You know, at least there's Star Wars, at least there's new Star Wars toys to get excited about.
I just ordered off of eBay to cheer myself up the other day because I was feeling down. I bought the child Black Series 6-inch.
Mm,
He's not 6 inches. He's actually like
yeah.
probably 1.5 inches tall or something, but it was actually affordable. I was surprised. I thought it was going to be like $60 or something. I grabbed it for $20, I think. So
Yeah, so, I mean, speaking of delays, they announced that there's a delay in the High Republic launch, and it's basically
yeah,
in January of 2021, so it'll become a 2021 initiative. Um, Not unheard of in these times. There's been a lot of Disney books that have adjusted their schedule, but they did move up the next Thrawn book, right?
yeah. So High Republic was coming out at the end of August, launching with that first novel by Charles Sewell, The Light of the Jedi, and that was kind of in conjunction with Star Wars Celebration, which was starting the same week. So it would have been like Tuesday that week, we would have got that novel, and I would have probably like rushed to read it in 2 days before Celebration started. None of that's, well, we don't know about Celebration. There's been no official announcement
Mhm.
about Celebration, whether it's going to be postponed or canceled or what. But the High Republic is now pushed back to January, another 5 months, I guess. Yeah. So that'll be delayed. And then, yeah, like you said, Thrawn Ascendancy, which is the prequel trilogy, is going to start a month. Well, okay. The original release date was actually May 5th. I was just looking at this. It was going to come out. It was supposed to have been out already at this point. It
Mhm.
got pushed to October 6th, and now it's moved back up 1 month to September 1st. So Timothy Zahn is easily my favorite Star Wars author. The Heir to the Empire trilogy in 1991 that started coming out, and that's what really, really got me into Star Wars as a 11-year-old. So yeah, I'm always excited to read a new novel that he puts out, and he's thankfully been steadily generating these Thrawn books, and they're all at least pretty good in the new
Yeah, I've
canon.
read a couple. I'm not caught up, but I'm using this time to kind of catch up on my Star Wars novel reading.
Yeah.
And speaking of which, you just were read Queen's Peril.
Yeah, I read Queen's Peril by E.K. Johnston. This is a prequel actually to Queen's Shadow, which came out last year. That one took place between episodes 1 and 2, after Padme Amidala stops being Queen of Naboo and becomes a senator. This one is right when she's elected queen, before the Phantom Menace. And then it actually, like, about halfway through the novel, it catches up with the beginning of the Phantom Menace, and then like becomes like a retelling of that movie through the eyes of Padme and her handmaidens. And I don't know. I keep saying like these books aren't for me. They're fine, they're well written and everything, but it would take a great story for me to be really interested in the handmaidens. I just can't bring myself to care that much. And this I didn't think was, I don't know, compelling enough. It was fine. It's not for me though. I keep saying it's not for me, and it's true. It's not intended for me. I'm not the audience. As much as a Star Wars fan as I am, I'm not the audience for these books. But I've read both of them, and I'm sure they'll do a third one, and I'll read that one too.
Yeah, I haven't read them, more of a time thing than a taste thing, but
Yeah.
it's nice that you have. What I like about them is it gives someone of a different demographic access to Star Wars. I think sometimes the adult novels, and I don't mean like adult novels, but I mean the Del Rey books, might not be accessible to a teenager.
Yeah.
Um,
And that's fine. I think that's great. I think,
Yeah.
that t-shirt, Star Wars is for everyone. I totally believe that. I think it's fantastic that more people from all walks of life are into Star Wars now than when I was growing up, when it was only me and two other dorky white dudes in my high school. So yeah, great. Bring in everybody. I want everybody to be a Star Wars fan. I have no problem with that. But I personally couldn't get into either of these books that much. Did I lose you there, Benji? Okay, it looks like we lost Benji. Let's see, what else do we have on our list here? Oh, is it back? Oh, you're back.
Sorry.
I was scrambling. I was like, oh, I got to come up with the next item. But
Yeah, sorry, internet little hiccup, but I'm sure you entertained everyone brilliantly.
yeah, I was like trying to find my outline that I had made.
Yeah. So actually, what I think a good place to sort of wrap up before we go into our housekeeping is Empire Strikes Back 40th anniversary. Was celebrated, but ILM yesterday did a YouTube chat with some of the visual effects folks behind it. How'd that go?
Yeah, it's weird. It was like a week late from the actual anniversary, but it was still really entertaining. Went for like 90 minutes, and it
Oh,
featured Dennis Muren, who's pretty famous, Joe Johnston, Phil Tippett, and one guy I wasn't as familiar with, Lauren Peterson, who was, I guess, a model maker. But yeah, it was really interesting. A lot of cool behind the scenes stories, some that I had heard before, some that I hadn't. And one tidbit that I found really enlightening that I had no idea, even though it was on Wikipedia and stuff. I don't know how I missed it, but there's one actor who always stood out for me in The Empire Strikes Back as being terrible, and he's a Hoth rebel soldier. And it turns out, yeah, that was Joe Johnston. They just gave him a little cameo in the movie, and he's just a terrible actor. But he's this visual effects guy, and then later a director. So I wouldn't expect him to be a good actor. Yeah.
so I have a question. Sometimes when people make a movie, like people that make Star Wars, or people that, outside of the second generation, I always wonder, like, do they know the terminology? Like, do they, how much do they get into it? Do they get into it as much as the fans? Like, when you're watching these visual effects legends from Empire Strikes Back, do they know what they're talking about now, or would a decent Star Wars fan kind of put them to shame?
I would say they probably know the stuff that was established then, but a lot of Star Wars lore and like character names and ship names have been invented in the last like 20-25 years, especially like applying them to characters from the original trilogy. They would just have like names for characters like Hammerhead in the bar in the cantina in the original film, but later on they decided like Hammerhead wasn't a Star Warsy enough name, so they renamed him Momon Nadan or whatever. So they would all know them by the names they were using during production, which was just like they just came up with some wacky name that applied to what the character looked like. So I don't know. I'm not sure if they would win in a competition.
Yeah, because I just know sometimes like when you talk when I worked at Disney, like the people we worked with like wouldn't know all the details of like even the characters, or because they didn't need to, and they were
Right.
surrounded by other stuff, so they might not, an Imagineer that's working on one attraction might know that backwards and forwards, but then they're just a typical guest because a lot of these jobs are very time consuming. You're not consuming media as much as the fans are, because it takes a lot more time to make it than it does to watch it. So, but
I think some of these guys are fans though of the things that they've created and helped to create. I think probably some more than others, but yeah, it seemed like listening to Joe Johnston talk, it seemed like he knew his stuff. I don't know, Phil. It's interesting, like looking at the background behind all those guys and kind of making like snap judgments about who they are as people based on like the organization of their houses or offices. Like Phil Tippett seems like a real hoarder like me. Like he had like a bunch of trophies and little knickknacks and stuff all over his shelves from all the stuff he's worked on for many years. But then like Joe Johnston seems like he's probably a neat freak.
yeah, I remember judging when they did that Disney family sing along stuff, judging all the people, not like positive or negatively, but like making backstories for all these people based on how their houses were like
Yeah.
we why this person has nothing in their house. Why is that?
Right. Yeah, that's whenever I see that, I'm like, I have so little wall space left because of all the stuff I have hanging up. I would kill for more wall space, and these people aren't even using it. What's going on?
Well, thanks for chatting Star Wars for a little bit. For more in-depth analysis and views and news, Mike has our Star Wars podcast, Who's the Boss? Perhaps the most cleverly named thing of 20. Was that? Did you launch it this year or last year?
February this year,
February.
yeah.
So, you just had Jeff DePauli on?
Yeah, we just had Jeff DePauli from the Disney Coast to Coast podcast. He also does the headlines. What's the headline show he does with Laughing Place?
Yeah,
I'm
that.
blanking.
Yeah.
And Jeff's a real good guy, very knowledgeable about Disney, and we talked about Spaceballs because he's a big Rick Moranis fan, and I hadn't seen Spaceballs in a long time, probably more than a couple decades, and just as a Star Wars fan, I was surprised that I wasn't more into it. Even this time watching it, I was just like kind of 50-50 on it, I think.
So
But
with the SpaceX thing, I was watching the news, and they had an interview with the NASA administrator, and they just sort of like a lightning fun round, and they asked him Star Wars or Star Trek, and he responded Spaceballs. Which,
fair enough.
not quite sure how to take that, but
and then I guess I'll make the announcement right now.
great.
Next week, a guest that I've wanted to have on the show since I started. I just was kind of waiting for an excuse, and I figured this announcement of the VR Star Wars Tales from the Galaxy's Edge was a good enough reason to talk to somebody about immersive storytelling in Star Wars. And I'll have my former boss, Ricky Briganti, as my guest coming up next week on the show.
That's exciting. Please give him our best. And,
Yeah, I absolutely will. I'm looking
listen.
forward to hearing from him. I know a lot of people are curious what he's up to today, so we'll talk about that.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Mike. For those of you who want the conclusion of our Disney World conversation, we'll be doing that a little bit later today. But that's our Star Wars show for this week. So thanks, Mike.
Bye. Thank you.